this voter registration, early vote, get out the vote effort is the whole game in the last 40 days. Who gets this wins. So let me ask you, let's just start with voter registration. Where are we now vis-a-vis 2020 and what's happening, especially in those battleground states, with respect to voter registration?
Again, I mean, and this is one of these things that, frankly, depending on how you polling may not entirely pick up the gains that voter registration produces. But of the 7 core battlegrounds, 4 actually register by party. So let's just go through those because it's easy to sort of verify those numbers publicly. In Arizona, by the end of July of this year, there was about 260,000 more registered Republicans than Democrats. That's almost 2x the advantage at the end of 2020. In 2020, there's about 140,000 more Republicans than Democrats. So we have almost doubled that. And frankly, we will have doubled that in all likelihood, if not more, by the time the election rolls around, because those are end of July numbers. They don't report but monthly. And obviously, the final reported raw vote deficit for Trump in Arizona was a little over 10,000 votes 4 years ago. So you're talking about a registration advantage net growth of 13 times the final reported margin against President Trump 4 years ago. Moving over to Nevada, going for 2020, going into election day, so kind of the book close, we call it, which is the numbers on election day. There's about 87,000-ish more Democrats than Republicans in the state of Nevada at that time. That's been cut down to 19,000. And in fact, we're continuing to make gains there. That's the net cut to the deficit is more than 2x the final reported raw vote deficit for President Trump 4 years ago, which is about 33,000 and change. Also, I'll note about Nevada, they've been cleaning up their voter rolls. We've been registering a ton of voters, but they've also been cleaning their voter rolls because they sort of, succumbed to our pretty aggressive tactics, suing and doing different things out there. And they didn't require the step of litigation, but they just dumped 140,000 ineligible voters off their rolls like a week or two ago, of which over 100,000 of those are in Clark County. So going back to that previous question, and that is the second round of cleaning in the last month or so. So going back to that previous question, Nevada is interesting because it's become a universal vote by mail state, which is different than every other state. You have to opt out of getting a mail ballot rather than opting in. And I'll talk about the mail ballot numbers in a minute. But there's just many less ballots on the street, and all of these bad voters that don't exist, that are inactive or ineligible or dead, shouldn't be on there, that were on there 4 years ago. They're not on there anymore because we forced them to clean the rolls. So that means those ballots aren't being sent out that otherwise would be, and just out on the street. So that is a strong advantage, comparatively. Moving over to North Carolina, there's about 126,000 more registered Democrats and Republicans. A lot of people don't know that. They think North Carolina is a majority Republican state. It's not by registration, hasn't been in a long time, but that's down 300, and that's down from over 391,000 more Democrats than Republicans 4 years ago. So a net improvement of like 265,000 registrants compared to 4 years ago. And again, the final margin there was a little over 74,000 and change was the final reported vote tally. So, you're talking about a net improvement in the registration rolls of 3.5 times the president's margin 4 years ago. Lastly, Pennsylvania, this is a big one. Everyone, talks a lot about Pennsylvania. There's about 680,000, roughly round numbers, more registered Democrats than Republicans there going into election day 2020. That's been cut down to below 345 or 343. We've flipped a bunch of the major counties. Bucks County, Luzerne County have been flipped from majority Democrat to majority Republican by registration. And again, the final raw vote deficit reported there in 2020 was about 80,000 for President Trump. So we've cut the deficit in voter reg by more than 4 times that final raw vote deficit 4 years ago. These are things that can't necessarily be picked up by all the polls, depending on how much they're putting in new registrants and, people who haven't voted and everything 4 years ago. Those are huge environmentally beneficial things to us kind of structurally with the structure of the electorate, and comes down to turning out those voters, of course. But to know how close those races turned out 4 years ago, and then add pulling ahead by 1, 2, 3, 4 points, and then add this much better position from a registration position, that adds up to an optimistic picture, I think, by any measure.
Oh, that's huge. And I know the other three states, we don't have public information, but do you have any insight into how they're doing
Yeah,
there?
we obviously have internal modeling, and the trends are basically the same. Republicans, President Trump is the one making the gains on voter registration. It's really not close. People are coming, getting active onto the voter rolls or changing party in some cases, to Republicans and to President Trump, and you see it to a degree reflected in even public polls. The New York Times last national poll they put out like 2 weeks ago, New York Times Siena poll, it had the race dead even, like 49-49 or something like that on the head-to-head ballot, amongst people that voted in 2020 or voted in every election. But if you hadn't voted in 2020, so mostly new registrants, President Trump was winning by 10 points. And you see that consistently in a lot of the public polling, that new registrants and infrequent voters like strongly favor President Trump by as much as double digits sometimes. And so that's, you're seeing that's kind of a downstream reflection of the voter registration trends being people joining the rolls to vote for him.
So we started voting here in Virginia. I had Ned Ryan on the show yesterday, and he was really making the pitch to get out and vote early, because he says it costs his group about $12 to contact a voter, and if they have to keep contacting them by the end of election day, it's going to cost them $100. So you're saving the movement, the campaign, and these outside groups a ton of money if you vote early. What are you guys seeing in terms of early voting so far in the states where they've started?
Yeah, let's talk about Virginia, because that's the first one where we've got a decent amount of data back from the first weekend of statewide in-person early voting. First, the why, if I could, and then I'll tell you what Virginia's telling us. Ned's absolutely right, and I know Ned's a smart guy. He's absolutely right. The sooner people vote, the better for us, because it does let us conserve resources, because they come off the lists, and that conserves human resources. It conserves volunteer efforts. It conserves money, obviously, and lets us redirect everything we have left onto a narrow group of people that tend to be the hardest to turn out. So tactically, that is hugely beneficial, and we would encourage all of our voters to vote early. And President Trump is doing the same thing for the same reasons. But in Virginia, so as of this morning, we've got a little over almost 102,000 votes cast and matched back to the voter file, versus a little over 59,000 at 43 days out of Election Day 2020. So big jump there in early voting. But here's the good news for Republicans. This is quoting our internal modeling, so you can't quite see it publicly, but roughly the same, probably, if you looked at the partisan numbers. Trump's, for what we would consider kind of a Trump turnout universe, we're at 242% of total turnout from 43 days out 4 years ago. So a huge jump, more than double. And Harris is at about 136% of total turnout from 43 days out 4 years ago. So she's had a little bit of a growth. We've had a big growth. So it is clear, you don't want to read too much into, a couple days early voting, but if you take that as an early leading indicator, there's some, suggestions that our goal of pushing people to early vote and just general enthusiasm is on our side. So I'm not here to say they won't make it up, but the first weekend is a good sign. We'd rather be in our shoes than theirs.
We talk a lot about the 7 battleground states. I live here in Virginia. I was the last Republican elector in 2004 to cast a vote for a Republican president. Is Virginia still a battleground state? And can I relinquish my title? Will President Trump come in and carry Virginia?
We're going to try. I certainly think so. I do think it is a battleground state. Obviously, you're not seeing a lot of air spending there, but that may change. There was a poll out that showed it, I think, 1 point race 3, 4, 5 days ago.
Yeah.
And all the chatter in Virginia is the fact that that pollster was like the only pollster that had Glenn Youngkin winning when he won. So we're keeping a close eye on it. We're keeping an eye on these early voting returns, obviously, and we'll make resource allocation decisions from an advertising perspective as we go. But we have a full on the ground team there. We have a full get out the vote apparatus there, working hand in glove with everyone there at the Senate race and Republican Party of Virginia, and obviously and Governor Youngkin. And obviously, our early indications are we're doing good getting people to the polls. So we'll see how it shakes out over the next few days and week or so.
Well, universally, the two biggest issues, and these are the last two things I want to cover with you. The two issues that every supporter of President Trump asks me and says, Sean, are you concerned about the ground game, number one? And number two, are you concerned about the cash advantage? So let's kind of take them in reverse order. She's raising a ton of money. President Trump's doing just well. I mean, you guys are raising plenty of money. Are you concerned in the final days about the amount of more money that they are going to have in their campaign, not just the outside groups, but in their campaign versus the Trump campaign?
We would always like to have more money. But the fact is, as a Republican, you get used to, if as a Republican operative, you get used to running against more money, for better or for worse. Republicans are generally outspent, and we were heavily outspent down the stretch 4 years ago, really in a way that, fortunately, there's no risk of, say, not having advertising on the air, as was the situation 4 years ago for the last several weeks. So I think that we'll have enough, and we have enough to do what we need to do. Yes, she will spend more. Yeah, it's a challenge. So, if you got money to give it. But it's not anything that is all that different than we're used to. And in certain ways, it's better than it's been in the past for us.
Is there any other state, you mentioned Virginia, that's you think is going to come into focus as a Trump state that we're not hearing about now?
Yeah, Minnesota is doing the same thing, where it had opened back up sort of in the public polling by as much as 10 when she first got in the race, and that then moved to 6, then moved to 5. Now it's in 4. As of a poll that was out yesterday or the day before. So I think looking at both of those states, New Hampshire, I think she's got a concern about. She went up on, and New Hampshire's a unique state, I'll tell you about. She went up on Boston broadcast, which is how you advertise really in New Hampshire. And it's very expensive to advertise on Boston broadcast. So she's obviously a bit concerned about New Hampshire. And I think if the right things come into play, that could be a serious opportunity for us. New Hampshire's interesting because it is just a complete turnout war in New Hampshire. New Hampshire you have to have an excuse to have an absentee ballot. So there's very few, and you can't vote early. There's no early in-person voting. So it is just election day. And, that was a 3,000 vote race in 2016. And obviously it's a bit bigger in 2020, but it was very close when there was a multi-candidate field and all of these things. And again, having the side that's probably more enthused and more equipped to turn people out, you could see a late breaking move there.
All right, so let's get to the ground game, because that's what I think everybody, myself included. How confident are you in the current ground game versus what they've got on the ground?
Well, for all they talk about it, there's not a whole lot of evidence of it. I mean, we've got people that are tracking and going to their door launches all the time in the battleground states to see what's going on, and they'd be lucky to get 3 or 4 people. Their offices seem pretty dead. I mean, I guess that's not bragging. That's just a fact. I mean, we have people that see what they're doing on the ground. It does not appear to be much, despite what they say in press releases. But I'm not really worried about what they can do. We control what we can control. We are moving people again. Hopefully you saw that first day of Virginia, and we'll see if that, continues all the way through with the other battleground states. Ourselves and our partners, if you will, are knocking more than 1 million doors a week across the battleground states. There'll be 15 million or more doors knocked between the end of August and Election Day across the battleground states, really focusing on low and mid propensity voters, because ultimately those are the ones that we need to turn out to win. We need to turn them out to win. And we really run up the score with those people for all the reasons I told you before, is that, you see those lower propensity in the polling, you see lower propensity voters go by as much as 9-10 points for President Trump. So we're really focused on expanding the electorate in the way that favors us. And it's through the old school ways between us and our allies, just straight door knocking. And I will say, let me do a plug for TrumpForce47.com. Go to TrumpForce47.com now to sign up. We are fully in mobilization, complete GOTV mode, just pounding the pavement and pounding the phones. And then obviously we've got our captains who have been organizing even smaller groups of turnout targets over time and pushing them to vote early that are just in their area. So now is when things are, all coming together, and we are just maximizing contact as much as humanly possible. And, so far I think that's going pretty well. And I do want to say, I think Republicans should be more. I think Republicans sometimes give too much credit to the Democrats for their ground game, for reasons that are, mostly because of what they've read, and they might do a better job of spinning than we do. But if their ground game was so strong, they wouldn't be getting killed in voter registration in 7 states. That is not something you want. They're also way behind in mail ballot.
So if people want to, that's where if you want to help, that's where, regardless of whether you live in a battleground state or not, is that where you want people to go?
Yes, if you sign up there, even if you're not in a battleground state, you'll get reached out to be put on the phone banks. If you can deploy into a battleground state to canvass doors and knock and everything as a volunteer for the last few weeks, we'll obviously take you and we'll arrange that. But we will get you immediately trained to get onto our remote phone banking program, which we have callers in all 50 states every day of the week. But go to TrumpForce47.com and we'll just pull you in from the non-battlegrounds and point you into the battleground states.
Feels like a telethon. We've got callers standing by in every state. I just want last question. I just want to ask you though, do you feel like this unique situation that's been presented this year, where you can coordinate with these outside groups, Turning Point, USA Action, America Works Action, etc., do you feel confident in their role and what they're doing?
I feel confident, and I feel more confident in some groups than others, shall we say. But, there's ways we can actually check on what they're doing. I do think that people misunderstand how much we can know about what's going on. So we've got a pretty good handle on who's doing what, down to what voters they're talking to and what the voters are telling them. And I'll probably leave it there just for legal reasons.
But you feel good overall.
Yes, I do. I'll put it to you this way. We will make more voter contacts in the 2024 election than we did in the 2020 election by the time election day rolls around. And we will have successfully canvassed more voters than we did 4 years ago. So that seems to be what we're measured against. But the fact is, we'll outperform that when it's all said and done.
Well, if you enjoyed this content, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and click the notification bell to get more.